I'm about to open escrow on a transaction, and I'm dealing with the buyer's attorney. She has problems with our CAB forms, so she felt like she had to rewrite the whole thing. And then she had to rewrite the addendums and include it all in the APA. And now we're getting to the stage where we have to open escrow, and we have a standard form in our brokerage that says, that we represent the seller, and there's a whole indemnification language for the brokerage. And she gave me this long, and the buyer and the seller are all gung-ho to, let's do it, let's open escrow, let's let's get this horse moving along. And she's like, no, I gotta rewrite this whole thing. And I just, I went back to my broker and I said, look, this attorney wants her own language in there. She doesn't want to indemnify us. So now we're kind of stuck because, of course, my broker's like, well, no, we're not letting anybody change the language of our boilerplate forms. We do have to be indemnified because we're just a middle person. I don't know how to move this forward because we're getting into the holidays, and that's what's going on with me.
So it's the buyer's attorney that's rewriting all the forms?
Yes. How would you approach this? So my forms, let's see, the authorization to open escrow is from my brokerage, and it basically says it defines parties to escrow. It has instructions to escrow, and it says validity of books and records, that the buyer acknowledges they looked at the books and records, and that the current books or records are not a guarantee of future performance, revenue, or income. It basically restates what the APA states, but just highlights it. Escrow fees are split 50-50, and the commission to broker is stated in there, that the job of the broker is basically bringing a buyer and a seller together, right? And that our payment is due, based on having brought this transaction to this point from escrow fees once we close escrow. So yeah. I don't know, she has a problem with that. It really restates everything that was stated in the APA.
But she already rewrote the APA and probably stripped a lot of that out.
She used the APA, but she had to rewrite some of her own addendums and outline the escrow's job. I'm like, okay, all right, if you want to get more specific, that's okay with me. So I don't know. I mean, she's a trial attorney too. And I said, look, it doesn't really help for everyone to start off on a litigious note. And she just said, well, I'm not intending, to do that, but I don't know what is gonna come back from all this.
I mean, I think that when you have an attorney who is not a transaction attorney, okay, and is obviously a litigator, you have to understand that litigators have a win-loss or a win-lose mentality. And the only way they win is if the other party loses. So if the attorney is representing the buyer, the only way the buyer wins in the attorney's mind is if the seller loses. Transaction attorneys understand that we're looking in a transaction, we need a win-win. We don't need a win-lose, because that's why you end up in a courtroom, right? We need a win-win. You cannot put buyer or seller in a bubble with zero risk and zero liability and get a transaction done. And that's what it sounds like this buyer's attorney is trying to do. Now, the buyer's attorney obviously has to mitigate the risk, but what I usually do is just have a very candid conversation with the buyer or the seller, depending on whose attorney it is that's about to destroy the deal. And I just say, look, your attorney is doing their job, as they understand it, but you as the client have the right and the ability to define the scope of what you want that attorney to do. So my recommendation is that you tell the attorney you want them to identify the risks and discuss those risks with you, but ultimately you are the decision maker as to what risks you're willing to take on. Because understand, you cannot buy a business and have no risk. There's risk, there's risk on both sides, seller and buyer. So the attorney's role really is to identify what the risks are, educate the client. Here's the risks that I see. There are ways to mitigate them. However, mitigating them all the way down to where there's no risk means there's no transaction. So which of these risks are you willing to take on? And how, what is your risk tolerance, Mr. Buyer or Miss Buyer? Right? And then the other thing you can do is you want to always you want to create business alliances with transaction attorneys so that when you have a buyer or a seller that wants an attorney review, you can give them 3 to 5 contacts that are all transaction attorneys that understand how to get a transaction to close rather than, how to rewrite all the paperwork so that it ends up not closing. Because the attorney is paid either way. The attorney doesn't care. They get paid either way. And actually, if they're rewriting, the more they write, the more they rewrite the contracts. I had one attorney one time that wanted to rewrite all the escrow instructions, the general escrow instructions. Wanted to, she went through, redlined the whole thing. Well, the escrow company was like, we're not doing this. What are you thinking? But meanwhile, she's churning fees,
Right, exactly. That's what I'm thinking, is that she's, getting her hourly fees. She is an associate attorney, so it's like, I guess they have a requirement or minimum. I mean,
Yeah.
Should I approach the buyer directly?
I would, you have the ability. That's one of the fantastic things about being a broker, right? Unless she has her own broker. If she has her own broker also,
No,
then
she just says the attorney and the buyer, because they're on an acquisition binge. And so they've been contacting businesses directly, and they're just working these deals without brokers. In most cases. And I talked to him, I said, there's a process to this. Every time he calls my seller, the seller says, well, Ann has all that information. You need to call Ann. So my seller's really good. He's directing everybody back to how the process is supposed to work, because he doesn't want to deal with it either. He's working. He's a job.
Yeah.
And so the buyer's bugging him, like, where are all the permits? And he's like, Ann has all that. Go through her. So the buyer did state to me, well, I haven't worked through a broker before because we just cut these deals on our own, and they have a whole, that's his job, is to call these auto shops to see if they want to retire, if they want to sell. So I'm like, that's my job.
Right.
So yeah, maybe I can talk to him about what the process is.
Well, and just say, I mean, the bottom line is the seller wants to sell and the buyer wants to buy. Now, if you have your purchase agreement and everybody has agreed to that, then, and it's been signed off on both sides, then you have an accepted deal. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about I would just send that accepted offer to escrow.
Oh, don't even send it the authorization to open?
Your purchase agreement already has escrow language in there if they use the CAB asset purchase agreement. So they're already, by signing that purchase agreement, they're already authorizing escrow to be opened. I mean, that's just part of the process. You don't sign a purchase agreement and then say, oh, okay, well, we're not going to open escrow for the next year and a half. Right? So the accepted offer is kind of authorization, unless there's language somewhere that says they're not going to open escrow until after due diligence has been completed or something else, something like that. So I would just go ahead and send it and open escrow, and don't worry about your broker's form. If all it does is repeat the language that's already in the APA, then you already have that signed off, so you don't need to worry about that.
Okay. Yeah,
But I would talk to the
they also have
buyer.
to sign off on the escrow service I've designated, because their designated escrow service provider is no longer accepting bulk sales. So I went ahead and typed up an addendum, and she, I think, threw the kibosh on that. I'm just like, well, what did I say? All I said was escrow is now appointed to business and escrow services. Anyway, I don't know. I don't know how to
Well,
deal with the gatekeeper.
yeah, I mean, I think you just talk to the buyer and just say, look, the escrow company you wanted doesn't do bulk sale escrows anymore. I have an escrow company that does. Are you okay with using it? If the buyer says yes, then it's here. You need to sign this addendum. So we
Okay.
can open escrow with this company.
Okay.
Because I'm assuming you had the other company in the purchase agreement.
Yes. That no longer does
Right.
bulk sales transactions. So
Right.
anyway, yeah, that's always a hiccup dealing with the attorney, because they want to look at everything. And I get it, but if they want to start rewriting all the forms that we use in our agency, then I've got to go through my broker, which takes more time. And now we're dealing with other wheels that has nothing to do with the transaction. I'm sure the buyer and seller are sitting there going,
Yeah. Well, it just explained to the buyer that the forms that you're using are put out by the California Association of Business Brokers, and the forms committee has 5 attorneys on it that put together those forms and review those forms. And there's really no reason, for the attorney to be rewriting all of those, just to tweak language here and there. If it doesn't make a material difference in the contract, then it's churning fees. There's just no point to it.
Okay.
So,
All right. Thanks.
and you might ask the buyer, did you want that to close this year? Did you want that to close first quarter of next year? Did you want, second quarter? I mean, because if your attorney's going to redo every single thing that is a standard part of the process, then just understand it's dragging this out, taking a lot of time. So be nice in how you say things, though, because obviously that buyer has a relationship with that attorney and has for a while.
Right.
So you're the new one to the mix. So you have to be careful how you state things to the buyer, because your relationship is new. That one's older. So there's more credibility in from the buyer's perspective, there's probably more credibility in what the attorney is saying rather than what you're saying.
Of course. Yeah.
So,
okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Uh-huh.